Hewitt. Senator Tom Cotton is from Arkansas. He is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he joins me. Good morning, Senator. Good afternoon, Senator. I'm still making the time switch. I have to ask you about the Hamas announcement today that they will no longer be releasing hostages according to schedules. Do you consider that agreement breached?
Hugh, the agreement has been breached almost from the moment Hamas entered it in ways big and small. And I think the world saw the egregious abuse that these hostages have suffered at Hamas's hands over the weekend when these rail-fin hostages were released. So I'm not surprised at any of this. I'm not surprised that Hamas is going back on its word. That's who they are. That's what they do. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu and, for that matter, Israeli public opinion has been dead right from the very beginning, in my opinion. Hamas has to be destroyed, no matter how long this deal goes. And hopefully as many hostages get released as possible, Hamas has to be destroyed. It cannot be allowed to remain in power or even extant inside of Gaza.
Now, Senator, I told Dr. Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, earlier on the program, I was shocked by the condition and the cruelty and the starvation of the 3 hostages who were released over the weekend, and their report that other hostages are being tortured and held in shackles and not fed. I don't know what Israel's supposed to do here. All I think the United States should do is support whatever Israel decides to do. What do you think?
Yeah, I've said from the very beginning, Hugh, on October 7th, 2023, that we need to back Israel to the hilt. Israel is a sovereign democratic nation, one of our closest allies in the world. They're fighting an existential war for their survival, not just against Hamas, but against the rest of Iran's ring of fire, like Hezbollah in the north, militias in places like Syria and Iraq, rebels in Yemen, and, of course, ultimately Iran itself, which has attacked Israel twice. Again, the treatment of these hostages, the appearance of those 3 that were released over the weekend just, proves the lie that we've heard time and time again. I can remember, Hugh, being lectured by the United Nations and by Cindy McCain and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar about how there was starvation occurring in Gaza. Yet every time you see these Hamas radicals, they seem to be pretty well fed, maybe even a little plump. And then Jewish hostages are released, and they look like, as President Trump said, Holocaust survivors.
Senator Cotton, your colleague Bill Hagerty tried to do something yesterday, which I just don't think there's any upside. I know you sit down with Margaret Brennan occasionally as well on Face the Nation, but she challenged him on the assertion that USAID was funding Hamas. He said, well, they give money to UNRWA. And she said, oh, that's not Hamas. I don't know if she's dumb or if she's brainwashed, but what do you think?
Well, we've long said that UNRWA is essentially an arm of Hamas and Palestinian terror, and it's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt in recent weeks, Hugh, as hostages have been released, and they've been told us that they were held in UNRWA facilities, to say nothing of UNRWA employees who are also Hamas terrorists. That's why we've totally defunded UNRWA, and we should salt the earth at every UNRWA location throughout the Middle East.
But our legacy media doesn't know that, or refuses to believe it. And I'm not singling out Margaret. It just happened to be on her show that this occurred. Does anyone in D.C. not understand what the world is dealing with, which is a Holocaust?
Hugh, in many cases, the liberal media, liberal Democrats, interest groups are all singing from the same progressive hymnal going back more than 100 years, and to acknowledge that UNRWA, or the United Nations for that matter, is riddled with anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments, attitudes, and actions, that places like USAID have largely become a vanguard of the global left, is to acknowledge the failure of their own project. And, of course, they won't acknowledge that. They'll say, oh, here and there might be a small bit of waste or some program that we wouldn't support. But by and large, it's a very important program that we have a single refugee agency dedicated to Arabs who were displaced in a war that was now almost 80 years ago, when every other refugee in the world is just fine to go to the UN's General Refugee Agency, or that AIDs is clean as a whistle, that they maybe have 1 or 2 small problems, but in reality they're doing very important work funding sex change surgeries in Guatemala or Sesame Street in Iraq. To acknowledge the reality of anything, though, is to acknowledge the failure of their broader progressive project, not just here but around the world.
Two more questions, Senator. The first is with Iran. If Israel delivers an ultimatum to Iran that says, if our people are not free, your oil industry will be destroyed and your nuclear sites will be pulverized, should the United States back them up?
As I've said since October 7th, 2023, we need to back Israel to the hilt. And I think now is maybe the best time for the United States to back Israel to the hilt, because they have shown, to borrow from our common enemy, that they are the strong horse once again. Over the last 6 months, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli government seems to have made a decision to, shall we say, settle all the family business. They have largely destroyed Hamas. There are some remnants remaining. They have largely destroyed Hezbollah. I don't even know who's in charge of it. Whoever it wasn't important enough to have a pager 4 months ago. But they have destroyed Iran's missile defenses and air defenses. Now is the time to finish the job, to totally neuter Iran's capability to threaten Israel and the United States for the foreseeable future.
All right, Senator, I want to switch to the courts. There are at least 4 TROs, or permanent injunctions, against initiatives of President Trump. 3 of those have come from Obama and Biden judges. One comes from a senior district court judge in Washington State that I regret to say was a Reagan appointee. But that was the dumbest of the opinion. This is, in my view, massive constitutional overreach, directing the executive branch how to run audits of the executive branch. What do you think?
Well, Hugh, all this is to be expected. Donald Trump and his senior advisors knew that Democrats would continue the lawfare that they launched against him during the campaign in 2016, through the special counsel's office, through the impeachment, and then most egregiously when he's out of office, trying to indict, convict him, and imprison him for the rest of his life. But I suspect most of these cases are going to work their way through the courts. The administration will win in the vast majority of them. I do want to single out one as just a particularly egregious overreach. This is by a judge named Paul Engelmeyer in New York, who on an ex parte basis, in the dead of night on Friday, a clear case of liberal Democratic attorney generals judge shopping in a way that would preclude the Trump administration from being overheard, purported to bar not just Elon Musk and his associates from Treasury Department systems and records, but the Secretary of Treasury himself. This Judge Engelmeyer seemed to elevate career bureaucrats over politically accountable Senate-confirmed officials, something that is unprecedented, to my knowledge, in the annals of American law.
I agree with that, Senator.
Immediately.
I would hope that it is lifted immediately. I would also put this in your ear for your friends on the Budget Committee. He's not a senior status judge. He should never be a senior status judge. We got to get rid of senior status judges. You can have lifetime tenure, but I don't think the Constitution obliges us to pay for the retirements of senior status judges. And I don't want that guy or any of these people getting tenure for life. And maybe you ought to relook at funding senior status judges as chambers. I think that fits under reconciliation and their salaries, and I believe it's constitutional. Senator Tom Cotton,